covering the stories that impact your life, your town, your state, and your future. This is the Means Report with your host, Brad Means.
Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Means Report. We appreciate you spending part of your day with us, where today we're going to talk about something that can be pleasant or it can be painful, depending on what you see when you open your notice from the tax assessor's office. We're going to talk about your home's value and the valuation process, how those taxes and fees and what the county thinks the price of your home is, how all of those things come together. And maybe once you have that insight, you'll be able to understand those notices a lot better and also know the proper course of action to take should you have any concerns or disagreements with those annual notices. And of course, we're always going to let you know how you can stay in touch with the Means Report. It's easy to do that. We'll wrap up this broadcast with that information. But first, a lot of talking to do with the Chief Appraiser for Richmond County, Georgia. He is Scott Roundtree. Scott, I know this is a super busy time of year for y'all. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
You're very welcome. Happy to be here.
I want to just get, not only for myself, but our audience, a basic understanding of what you do. Is it the appraiser's job to determine the value of every piece of property in Augusta?
That is correct. That's the first part of our mission, is to determine the uniform fair market value of all property in Richmond County.
And when we do hear what the valuation, and that's the right word, right? The valuation?
Correct.
Of our home is, should we equate that with the price of the home? I open the notice, I say, oh, this is what I could get if I sold my home, because that's what Scott said it said is the value.
And that is our goal, to have a value that is as close as possible to what your home would sell for or property. And as of January 1st, that's our date of assessment. So that's where we're focusing our valuations.
To me, they seem lower than what I think my house is worth. Do you hear that a lot?
We don't hear that a lot through the appeals process.
No, I bet you don't. Yeah.
But that is our observation as
Right.
well, that the majority of homes and properties are selling for higher than what their tax value is.
Hey, that's a good point. You want your home, from a taxpayer's perspective, to be as cheap as possible. What about this? Do real estate folks ever come to you and say, or buyers or sellers ever come to you and say, look, I need your valuation as evidence that I shouldn't be paying X for this house? In other words, somebody sets their sale price too high. They use your data to refute that price.
We get that in both directions, but try our best to stay out of the open markets and just reflect what the markets are doing. So if you have a concern about your appraisal when you're trying to buy something, that's why they use fee appraisers through the banks that they're borrowing from or hiring one on their own.
Why do valuations change from time to time? Why can't you just set the price and it pretty much stays there? What causes the fluctuation?
So the fluctuation is based on what the market is doing. We have to reflect the changes that are actually happening in the market from sales that have occurred in prior years. So the primary driver of revaluations is what the market is doing. We're looking back at the history of the real estate market and trying to reflect that as best as we can.
Okay, so you're looking at comps just like a realtor would.
Correct.
How are we doing right now? Some days I hear that the housing market is booming. Other days I hear that we've taken our foot off the gas. It's kind of settling back down. How about from your vantage point?
So from our observations, the market has cooled, I guess, as far as volume. We see less sales in the recent months than we have in prior years, especially the last 2 years. But we haven't seen a cooling in prices. The last 2 years, we've seen a significant increase in market values, what things are selling for, and it hasn't necessarily slowed down very much. My study of the first quarter of this year shows they're continuing to go up, maybe not as fast as they have in the past, but the market still is getting high results for sales prices.
I want to get into some of the calculations that you use to determine your numbers, but let me ask you if you know which part of town is hot right now off the top of your head. Is there a section of Augusta where sales are high or prices at least are high?
It seems like everywhere is hot as far as things selling. The highest prices we typically see are the newer construction, especially around Fort Gordon area, where all the new neighborhoods are being developed. Also, the more historical areas of town like Somerville and West Augusta, where you're close to a lot of amenities and there's less available real estate to acquire, we see some higher prices in those areas.
All right, so kind of take us behind the numbers, if you will. What
Sure.
do you look at when you say, okay, time to determine the value of this property?
We look at every characteristic of that property. In the case of residential properties, how large is it? What's the quality of the house? Where is it? What's the location? There's infinite things we can look at, but we have to have a good understanding of what that market is and why buyers would buy property in that area. And so we use those characteristics against sales prices to determine how much value individual characteristics provide to a house.
All right, so I'm picturing people sitting at a computer, a GIS map, if you
Okay.
will, and looking at these properties and determining these valuations based on what you just said. Do you ever do a site visit to look at a house or other property?
We do, and we do lots of site visits. Some years we've done as many as 20,000 property visits within the calendar year.
Wow.
So we try to get to every property every 3 to 5 years and physically look at it. We look at every single property that gets a building permit within the year
Okay.
to see what kind of physical changes may have occurred at the property, or even to just check that our information is correct and we're reflecting what it truly is. We also do field checks on properties that have sold in the last year to make sure we understand what condition and the property is in at the time of sale and currently.
Do we know that you're there? Is it a drive-by kind of a thing, or do you knock on the door and say, look, we're going to be taking a peek at your place for the next few minutes?
So it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
For most of the building permits, we will go to the front door, knock, and see if anyone is there and ask questions about the inside of the home, which we don't want to go into if we don't have to. So we try to get information directly from the property owners, and then we'll do a walk around and take some pictures and make sure we have everything correct on our information.
How many properties are under your purview? And that might be a fair question to ask, just right off the bat, because it's probably in the tens of thousands. Do you know how many that you have to assess or value?
So there are nearly 80,000 taxable parcels in Richmond County. And so it's our objective to get those correct every year.
How many appraisers do you have? How many people in the tax assessor's office do you have to handle those 80,000?
Sure. We have on our residential team, we have 12 appraisers, and on our commercial team, we have 4 appraisers.
If the county needs money, Scott, if Richmond County's coffers are low, can't you just do a quick revaluation on, say, a few of those 80,000 properties and make more money for the county?
So the revaluation process shouldn't be used to collect more money. That should be done through the budgeting process
Sure,
and setting
should.
and setting the millage rates. In fact, when we do a large revaluation, the Georgia has a taxpayer bill of rights that requires that levying authority, either the commission or the Board of Education, determine what a tax rate would be so that they don't collect any more taxes from the prior year because of that reassessment. And if they want to have a tax rate that's higher than that, they have to call it a tax increase and go through public hearings to get that out to the public.
Probably my last question before we take a quick break, and it's just about the timetable that you use for these revaluations. It seems to me, and I could be wrong, that we're doing them more often lately. How often do you do those in Richmond County?
So it's true that historically we didn't do them as often.
Yeah.
So if we're in a real estate market where prices are only changing up or down 2 to 3% every year, you can do them periodically. But as markets move quickly, we have to respond in kind and get those values in line with what the market is doing.
All right, we are talking about the value of your property in Richmond County, Georgia, and it applies probably to any county in the Peach State, how the process is handled with Richmond County's Chief Appraiser, Scott Roundtree. Our conversation with Mr. Roundtree continues. Good information for you to know as your valuation notices hit home in a few short weeks, and then after that, of course, your tax bill. The Means Report continues. Welcome back to the Means Report. We are talking about the value of your home, and ultimately that decides how much property tax you pay. Richmond County, Georgia's Chief Appraiser, Scott Roundtree, is our special guest. Scott, before we went to break, you were telling us about revaluations and how often you have to do them and how a lot of that is based on the real estate market. My question as we come back is, when you do a revaluation, is it all or nothing? Do you have to do the entire 80,000 properties, or can you just pick and choose?
So we can certainly stratify things and find categories of property that are valued okay and those that aren't, and try to only revalue those areas that statistics would show need some level of attention.
How is that information brought to your attention, the attention of your office, that, hey, things are changing here from a value standpoint, you may want to redo these?
So we study every sale that occurs as it happens.
Okay.
We review all the deeds that are recorded with the courthouse, and we study the sales all through the year to determine how our values are doing compared to the real estate market.
Scott, what got you interested in this? It is fascinating and it impacts people in a huge way.
Sure.
When did the light bulb come on for you where you said, I love this?
So I think a lot of people in the assessment industry would say they got it into the position accidentally,
Yeah.
or they needed a job,
Right.
Which was the case for me. And it was very quick that I learned that I really enjoyed the public service, the analysis, and I'd always been involved in the real estate industry, and this was really a position that took all of my skills and put them to work.
And people are civil with you, aren't they? I know that sometimes there's pushback from homeowners, property owners, but people are nice as a general rule, aren't they?
Absolutely.
All right, this might be too much inside baseball, but I see these terms and I just wanted you to help walk me through them.
Okay.
What's a ratio study? And once you tell me that, what kind of numbers do you use to come up with those figures?
So a ratio study is an analysis of sales, truly just comparing what sales are doing to what the tax values are, so that we can see how close we are to fair market value on a property. One of the key ratios that we use is the valuation compared to the sales price.
Okay.
That assessment sales ratio tells you how close you are to a property value's true market value.
Okay, so that situation, if I'm understanding correctly, would be a home sells for $100,000. You had it valued at $80,000, and that's going to make, I don't want to say that's going to flag that sale, but that's going to catch your attention.
It would.
Okay.
So that would show us a ratio below what fair market value is, and we would want to take a look at sales like that.
So is it likely that you're going to get taxed more in the coming years if that happens to you?
No, it's all going to be relative, I guess, to the overall digest increase, the value of all properties put together, and in the end, what the budget and millage rates are that are going to be applied to your value. So there is a possibility that there is an increase in your home value and your tax bill is neutral, but it can also go up.
If your neighbor sells his or her home for above market value, is that going to hurt you tax-wise?
So we try to look at it not as a one-to-one comparison, but what the entire market is doing and trying to find the averages and medians of what a house would sell. So if your neighbor's sells for above market value, but everybody else is selling at an amount that's more predictable, we try to lean into what most properties are doing.
So what have you learned when it comes to sales ratio studies versus tax values? Are there any key takeaways that you would want to share with us when you've done that analysis?
I think especially for the analysis we did on 2022 sales, it was across the board that majority of properties in Richmond County were selling for less than what our tax values were.
Less.
Oh, my apologies.
More.
Selling for more than what our tax values are.
Okay, yeah. No, that's what I thought, and that's fine. What about this year's property values, the latest numbers that you have? I know, as I said at the top of this broadcast, that y'all are hard at work. When are those values going to be in and mailed out?
So they should be in the mail at the end of June.
End of June. Okay, and then tax bills are September, right?
They are closer to the fall, yes.
Right, and you talk about people being civil and being nice as a general rule. You're the appraiser, not the collector, right?
Correct.
That comes in the fall.
Correct.
How can we find out what kind of value our home has? Do we have to wait for those annual notices, or is there a way to get in touch with your office to kind of get a glance at those numbers?
So the information we have is still kind of a work in progress, so we can share generalities and percentages and how markets are doing. But until we establish those values, we typically don't share what they are. The Board of Assessors, which oversees our office, will review and approve those values, and after that approval, we will mail the notices to every property owner in the county.
Do you find that the numbers that your office comes up with typically are an exact match for our tax bill? Those values are always going to be the same? Is that a fair assumption?
So the values are going to remain at the value unless you appeal the assessment that we send. The tax estimate that's actually on our notice is an estimate. It is the values that we're using for the current year and the tax rates that were applied to last year's tax bill. And so that tax rate can change, and it did last year. Both the school board and the Board of Commissioners had a millage rate that was lower than the year before. So those were estimates, and most bills were slightly less than what that estimate showed.
Walk me through the appeals process.
Sure.
Is it complicated?
It's not complicated. We've got a good staff that will walk anybody through the process that is interested. Once that notice hits the mail, the property owner does only have 45 days to file an appeal. That's a hard deadline that we follow based on state law. And when they come in to talk about their appeal, we will try to sit with them if we have the opportunity to do so, or set up an appointment to come to their house. We'll tell them what they can appeal and how they can appeal it, and just make sure that they have all the information they need to understand why a value may have changed.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the types of things that we can appeal. Is it just the value itself, or can we hit some of those fees that show up?
So you can appeal the value. You can appeal the uniformity. In other words, how fair is the price compared to other property in the county? And that's not a one-to-one comparison, but how do we look like overall in the county as far as uniformity of price? You can appeal any exemptions that may have been denied if you filed for a homestead exemption or some other specialized assessment that the state provides. But you can't appeal the taxes or the fees, only the valuations and the uniformity.
Can we invoke the valuations from nearby counties and use that as part of our appeal?
So the county next door may not do a reappraisal at the same time we would. So
Right.
it may be that their values don't reflect the same point in time that ours do. So we consolidate those appeals and what you can use to, consider as a comparable to within Richmond County.
How does Richmond County stack up when it comes to appraisals at the very least, and certainly taxes, compared to other counties? Sometimes I see the person with the fancy new Columbia County home paying lower taxes than a similar Richmond County homeowner.
So my review of millage rates shows that the tax rates in Columbia County and Richmond County aren't that different.
Okay.
And the home values are certainly higher in Columbia County than they are in Richmond County. So if you were to look at the whole county and the average price of a house, I would think that the taxes would be lower in Richmond County, mainly because the average home value is slightly lower.
Any advice that you can give us when it comes to reducing our tax liability? What options are out there to try to do that? Because as we said at the beginning, we want the home to be as low priced, low appraised as possible.
And I think the appeals process is a great place to start if you disagree with the value. It gives us a good chance to really make sure our information is correct on your home that's being used to determine the value. If you own the home and you live in it, make sure that you have the appropriate homestead exemption, which allows for a reduced taxability of your property. And there's a standard homestead exemption that saves you a couple $100 a year. There are also exemptions for seniors and those with disabilities that the tax commissioner who takes the applications can walk through with you and make sure you're getting the right one.
Scott, you mentioned those neighborhoods that are popping up near Fort Gordon. If you do live in a neighborhood where, especially these new developments where the houses are very similar, if not identical, is it fair to assume that all of their taxes are the same?
May not be. So the taxes are a combination of the value and the type of homestead exemption you have. And so, for example, if you look at your neighbor's house and see that their tax value is the exact same, but their tax bill is about half or less, it could be that they have a homestead exemption that exempts their school tax, which is provided for anybody that's 65 and older in Richmond County.
Is there ever an instance where the assessed value of a home during one of y'all's revaluations goes up, but their taxes that year go down? I'm guessing if they check all the boxes as far as the exemptions that you've been mentioning, that is possible. Have you seen it?
That can happen.
Yeah.
Right? So if your value goes up a less amount than the overall county tax digest, and you get a new exemption on the property, it could reduce your tax liability for that year.
I did have another question about the
Okay.
appeals. I forgot to ask you, how often are they successful? How much hope should homeowners have if they want to go down that road?
So last year, I think we had just north of 1,000 appeals. And well over half of those were adjusted or withdrawn by the property owner because they agreed with the value after review. So I think the success is pretty good, that well over half of the properties, the property owners decided they didn't want to carry on with the appeal because they determined we had given them an appropriate value.
Yeah, is that ever, so that it is possible to stop in midstream? If I start to get the sense that, oh no, I shouldn't have appealed, now my value might go up, that you can say, let's just leave things as they are. Scott, I loved the notice that you sent me. I'm going to back off now. Can people stop midstream or once the appeal process is underway?
They can choose to not go forward, but if they continue to be dissatisfied with the value, after review by our office, we will send it to a board of equalization, which is actually selected by the grand juries at the clerk of superior court. So there is a hearing with 3 independent, non-biased individuals who will hear both sides of the case and determine which one seems more appropriate.
Kind of makes me just want to open the notice and leave well enough alone, but the appeals process certainly is there and the door is open. Did I fail to ask you anything? I wanted to make sure that the homeowners and property owners had no stone left unturned after our time together. Anything you can think of?
I guess I want to make sure that it's known that the appeal process is available every year. We'll send these notices every year, and the state does require we send it to every taxable property. So there is always an opportunity to come in and make sure we get things right if you disagree with what we've got. I'll also mention that every year from the beginning of the year, January 1 until April 1, is called a return period. You can also come in during that time and make sure that the information we have on your property is correct. You can declare what you think a value is. It's not an appeals process, but it is an opportunity for a property owner to put forth what they feel is the true worth of the property.
Good to know that those options are out there. Hope people will take advantage of them. Scott Roundtree, thank you to you and your team back at the office for all y'all do. We appreciate you.
Thank you for having us here.
Absolutely.
Right.
Scott Roundtree, the Chief Appraiser for Richmond County. Look for those notices coming up, as he mentioned, in the very near future when we come back. How you can shape future editions of the Means Report. Stay with us.